The sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion as another nanny ran screaming from the house, her designer uniform torn and her hair filled with what looked like maple syrup. She was the 14th nanny in 2 months. Richard Blackwell stood at his office window watching the woman flee down the long driveway. His jaw tightened as he rubbed his temples. The richest man in England, owner of 3 major companies, and he could not handle 4 6-year-old children. His phone buzzed. Mr. Blackwell, his assistant's nervous voice came through. The nanny agency says they won't send anyone else. They're putting your family on their blacklist. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please support me by subscribing to my channel, like and share this video to your family and friends. I truly appreciate your kind heart. So, let's begin. Richard closed his eyes. 2 years ago, his world had been perfect. He had his beautiful wife Sarah, their miracle quadruplets, and more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Then the car accident happened. In one terrible night, he lost Sarah and became a single father to 4 children who seemed determined to drive away anyone who tried to help. The quadruplets were not ordinary children. Emma was the leader, smart as a whip but with a temper that could melt steel. James was quiet but sneaky, always planning the next prank. Lucy was sweet to his face but turned into a little monster the moment he left. And little Thomas, the baby of the 4 by 3 minutes, was the most dangerous of all because he looked so innocent while causing the most chaos. Sir, his assistant was still on the line. I'll handle it, Richard said, though he had no idea how. That evening, he sat in his study, staring at his laptop screen. Every nanny agency in London had blacklisted him. The children were upstairs, probably planning their next attack. He could hear them whispering and giggling. That sound used to make him smile. Now it filled him with dread. A knock at his office door made him look up. His housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson, peeked in. She was the only staff member who had stayed, but only because she locked herself in the kitchen and refused to deal with the children. Sir, there's a woman at the door. She says she's here about the nanny position. Richard frowned. I didn't call anyone. She says she heard about your situation and wanted to help. Something in Mrs. Peterson's voice made Richard curious. In 2 months, he had never heard her sound impressed by anyone. He followed her to the front door. Standing on his doorstep was a woman in her 30s, with kind eyes and a calm smile. She wore simple clothes and carried a small bag. Everything about her seemed peaceful, which was strange because no one looked peaceful when they came to his house anymore. Mr. Blackwell, I'm Grace Johnson. I heard you needed help with your children. Her voice was soft but confident. Richard found himself staring. There was something about her that made him feel calm for the first time in months. Miss Johnson, I should warn you, these are not normal children. 14 nannies have quit in 2 months. The agencies won't even take my calls anymore. Grace smiled. Children are never the problem, Mr. Blackwell. They're just trying to tell us something. Before Richard could respond, a water balloon exploded at his feet, soaking his expensive shoes. He looked up to see 4 little faces disappearing from the upstairs window. Grace laughed. It was a warm, musical sound. That was a good throw. Very accurate. Richard stared at her. You're not running away. Why would I run? I haven't met them properly yet. At that moment, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. She was the spokeswoman for the group, always the first to confront new nannies. Her blue eyes were cold and calculating. You won't last an hour, Emma called down. We've made 17 people cry. One man even wet himself. Emma, Richard snapped, but Grace held up her hand. 17? That's impressive. You must be very creative. Grace looked up at the little girl with genuine interest. I'm Grace. What's your name? Emma blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Emma. And I'm not creative. I'm mean. Being creative and being mean aren't the same thing, Grace said. Though I bet you're very good at both. James appeared next to his sister. Are you scared of spiders? Not really. Are you? No, James said quickly, then paused. Maybe a little. Lucy and Thomas joined their siblings on the stairs. All 4 children stared down at Grace like they were studying a new species. We don't want a nanny, Lucy announced. We want our mummy. The words hit Richard like a punch to the chest. He saw Grace's expression soften with understanding. "I bet you do," Grace said gently. "It must be very hard not having her here." Thomas, the youngest, started to sniffle. "Daddy cries sometimes. We hear him at night." Richard felt his face burn with embarrassment, but Grace just nodded. "Daddies are allowed to cry. It means they love you very much." For a moment, the house was completely quiet. Then Emma's cold mask slipped back into place. "We don't care. We still don't want you here." "That's okay," Grace said. "You don't have to want me here, but I'm not leaving just because you don't want me to." Richard held his breath. This was usually when the chaos started. Emma's eyes narrowed. "We'll make you leave." "You can try," Grace said with a smile. "But I should warn you, I have 7 younger brothers and sisters. I've seen every trick in the book." The children looked at each other, having a silent conversation. Finally, Emma shrugged. "Fine, but don't say we didn't warn you." The 4 of them disappeared upstairs. Richard heard their bedroom door slam. "Miss Johnson," Richard began, "maybe you should—" "Mr. Blackwell, may I ask you something?" Grace interrupted. "When did they start acting like this?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Right after the funeral. At first I thought it was just grief, but it kept getting worse. They drove away my mother-in-law, Sarah's sister, even my best friend. I don't understand what they want from me." "They want to know you're not going anywhere," Grace said simply. "Every adult in their world has left them. Their mother died. Every nanny runs away. They're testing everyone to see who will stay." The words hit Richard like a revelation. "You think that's what this is about?" "I think they're terrified, and terror makes people do desperate things, even little people." That night, Richard barely slept. He kept listening for sounds of chaos from upstairs, but the house was strangely quiet. In the morning, he went downstairs, expecting to find Grace gone like all the others. Instead, he found her in the kitchen, making breakfast. She was humming softly, and the smell of pancakes filled the air. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. Coffee?" "You're still here." "Of course I'm still here. I told you I wasn't leaving." "But the children, they didn't try anything?" Grace smiled mysteriously. "Oh, they tried a few things. I'll need to wash my sheets, and someone put plastic wrap over the toilet seat in my bathroom. Very creative." "And you're not angry?" "Why would I be angry? They're just being children." At that moment, the quadruplets appeared in the doorway. They looked confused and a little disappointed. "You're still here," Emma said flatly. "Good morning to you too, Emma. Are you hungry?" The children exchanged glances. They were clearly off their game. "We don't eat breakfast," James declared. "That's fine. More pancakes for me." Grace continued cooking without looking at them. Richard watched in amazement as the children hovered in the doorway, clearly unsure what to do next. Finally, Thomas's stomach growled loudly. "I might want a small pancake," he whispered. "Thomas," Emma hissed, but Grace was already putting a plate on the table. "Here you go, sweetheart." One by one, the other children sat down. They ate in silence, stealing glances at Grace. Richard realized it was the first peaceful breakfast they'd had in 2 years. After breakfast, Grace did something no other nanny had tried. Instead of making plans for the children, she asked them what they wanted to do. "We want to play in the garden," Lucy said cautiously. "Sounds perfect." Richard watched from his office window as Grace followed the children outside. He expected to see chaos, but instead he saw something he hadn't seen in years. His children were playing normally. Grace sat on a bench reading a book, but she was alert to everything happening around her. When James fell and scraped his knee, Grace cleaned it gently and put on a bandage. When Emma got frustrated with a puzzle, Grace showed her a different way to approach it. When Lucy felt left out of the boys' game, Grace invented a new game that included everyone. For the first time in months, Richard was able to work for a full hour without interruption. The real test came that afternoon. Richard heard shouting from upstairs and ran to see what was happening. He found Grace sitting calmly on Thomas's bed while the little boy threw the biggest tantrum he'd ever seen. "I hate you! I hate everyone!" I want my mummy! Thomas was red-faced and screaming, throwing toys and books across the room. Richard started to intervene, but Grace shook her head. It's okay, she said softly. He needs to get this out. She sat there patiently while Thomas raged. When he finally collapsed sobbing, she opened her arms. Come here, baby. Thomas threw himself into her lap, crying so hard he could barely breathe. Grace held him close, rocking gently. I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to be angry. Richard felt tears stinging his own eyes. When was the last time he had held his children while they cried? When was the last time he had let them be sad instead of trying to fix everything? That evening, Grace found Richard in his study. He was staring at a family photo from before the accident. She was beautiful, Grace said softly. She was everything, Richard replied. I don't know how to be both parents to them. You don't have to be both parents. You just have to be their father. I feel like I'm failing them every day. Grace sat down across from him. Mr. Blackwell, can I tell you something? Those children love you so much it scares them. They're afraid you'll leave too. Every time they push you away and you stay, they love you a little more and fear a little less. But they never act like this with me. With me, they're almost polite because they're terrified of making you angry. They think if they're too much trouble, you'll go away like everyone else. Richard felt like he'd been hit by lightning. What do I do? Be patient. Let them know it's safe to be children around you. Let them know you're not going anywhere, no matter what they do. Over the next few days, Richard watched Grace work magic with his children. She set boundaries, but she did it with love. When Emma was rude, Grace calmly explained why that wasn't okay and gave her a chance to try again. When James played a prank, Grace acknowledged that it was clever but explained why it might hurt someone's feelings. Most importantly, she never threatened to leave. I've noticed something, Grace told Richard one evening. Emma takes care of everyone else, but no one takes care of Emma. James hides his feelings behind jokes. Lucy tries to be perfect because she thinks that will make people stay. And Thomas acts out because he's the baby and doesn't know how else to get attention. You figured all that out in a week. I had help. They told me in their own ways. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Richard was working late when he heard piano music from the music room. Sarah used to play piano for the children every evening. The piano had been silent since her death. He found Grace at the piano with all 4 children gathered around her. She was playing a simple song and the children were singing along. Their voices were sweet and clear, and for a moment Richard could almost imagine Sarah was there with them. Emma noticed him first. Instead of stopping the song, she held out her hand. Daddy, come sing with us. Richard's throat tightened. Emma hadn't called him Daddy in months. She'd been calling him father in a cold, formal way that broke his heart. He sat down next to Thomas, who immediately climbed into his lap. As they sang together, Richard realized this was the first time in 2 years that his family had felt complete. That night, after the children were in bed, Richard found Grace in the garden. She was sitting on the swing that Sarah used to love. They're different children than they were 2 weeks ago, he said. No, they're the same children. They just feel safe now. How do I thank you for this? Grace smiled. You don't need to thank me. This is what they needed all along. They just needed someone who wouldn't give up on them. The other nannies saw 4 problem children. I see 4 children with a problem. There's a difference. Richard sat down on the swing next to her. Grace, I need to ask you something. Why did you really come here? You could work for any family in London. Why choose the impossible case? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Because I lost my parents when I was 7. I went to live with my grandmother. But first, I lived with 3 different families who couldn't handle a grieving child. I know what it feels like to be given up on. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. It taught me something important. Children don't need perfect people taking care of them. They need people who won't give up on them. 3 months later, Richard realized he couldn't imagine life without Grace. She had become part of the family in a way that went beyond her job. The children adored her, and she had brought peace to a house that had known only chaos. More than that, she had helped Richard become a better father. She showed him how to listen to his children, how to comfort them when they were sad, and how to discipline them with love instead of frustration. Grace, he said one evening as they watched the children play in the garden, I need to tell you something. She looked at him curiously. I'm falling in love with you. Grace's eyes widened. Richard, I know it's complicated. I know I'm your employer and you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. You've saved my family. Grace was quiet for a long moment. I care about you too, Richard, more than I should. Then why do you look sad? Because I'm the nanny. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about me, about us. They'll say I'm after your money, that I seduced you to get a better life. Richard took her hands. I don't care what people say. But I do, and I care about the children. What if people say I'm not good enough for them? What if they face prejudice because of me? Grace, look at me. Richard waited until she met his eyes. My children love you. You've given them their childhood back. You've given me my children back. Nothing else matters. 6 months later, Richard Blackwell shocked London society by marrying his children's nanny. The newspapers had a field day, printing terrible stories about the billionaire who married beneath his station. Grace faced cruel comments and nasty looks wherever she went. People questioned her motives and her background. Some of Richard's business associates were openly hostile, but none of it mattered because the children were thriving. Emma had grown from a cold, controlling little girl into a confident leader who took care of others with kindness instead of manipulation. James still loved pranks, but now they were harmless fun instead of mean-spirited attacks. Lucy had stopped trying to be perfect and learned to be herself. And Thomas, sweet Thomas, was finally just a normal little boy who laughed more than he cried. On their wedding day, as Grace walked down the aisle, she saw 4 little faces beaming at her from the front row. Emma was holding a sign that said, Welcome to the family. James was trying not to cry. Lucy was bouncing with excitement, and Thomas was grinning so wide his face might split in half. After the ceremony, Emma hugged Grace tightly. Are you really our mummy now? She whispered. If you want me to be. We do. We want you to be our mummy forever and ever. Grace knelt down so she was eye level with all 4 children. Then I'm your mummy forever and ever. Nothing will ever change that. As the years passed, the Blackwell family became known for their happiness instead of their chaos. Richard's business grew even more successful, but his greatest achievement was his family. Grace never went back to being just a nanny. She became a mother, a wife, and a pillar of the community. She started a foundation to help other grieving families, and she never forgot what it felt like to be the outsider who was given a chance. The children grew up to be remarkable adults. Emma became a doctor who specialized in helping children through trauma. James became a teacher who used humor to help kids learn. Lucy became a social worker who advocated for families in crisis. And Thomas became a psychologist who helped other families heal from loss. But no matter how old they got or how far they traveled, they always came home for Sunday dinner. And every Sunday, Grace would look around the table at her family and remember the day she knocked on the door of a desperate single father and 4 broken children. She had come to that house to be a nanny. Instead, she found her destiny. The story of Grace Johnson and the Blackwell Quadruplets became legendary in their town. People would point to their house and tell their children about the woman who refused to give up on 4 impossible children. But Grace knew the truth. The children hadn't been impossible. They had just been hurt, and sometimes all hurt children need is someone who will stay long enough to help them heal. Years later, when people asked Grace what her secret was, she would smile and give the same answer every time. There's no secret. Children just need to know they're loved exactly as they are, not as we wish they were. And they need to know that love isn't going anywhere no matter what they do. But the journey to that wisdom hadn't been easy. There were many moments when Grace herself had doubted whether love would be enough. The first real crisis came 6 months after Grace arrived. Emma, now 7, had been doing wonderfully in school until a new girl named Charlotte joined her class. Charlotte came from old money, the kind of family that had titles and estates. When Charlotte found out that Emma's new stepmother had been a nanny, she made sure everyone knew. My mother says your stepmother is just a servant who married your father for his money, Charlotte announced loudly during lunch. She says people like that don't belong with people like us. Emma came home that day with fire in her eyes. She stormed into the house and found Grace in the kitchen. Is it true? Emma demanded. Did you marry Daddy for his money? Grace set down the wooden spoon she was holding and looked at Emma carefully. The other children had gathered in the doorway, sensing drama. What do you think, Emma? I think Charlotte Williams is a mean, spoiled brat, Emma shouted. But everyone at school is talking about it. They're saying horrible things about you, about us. Grace knelt down to Emma's level. Do you want to know why I really married your father? Emma nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Because I fell in love with a man who would do anything for his children, and because I fell in love with four amazing children who taught me what family really means. The money had nothing to do with it. But what if people keep saying mean things? Then we'll prove them wrong by being the best family we can be. What other people say about us doesn't change who we are. James stepped forward from the doorway. Emma, remember what Grace taught us? People who are mean to others are usually just scared or sad about something. Charlotte's not scared, Emma muttered. She's just mean. Maybe she's scared that she's not as special as she thinks she is, Grace suggested gently. Maybe she's learned that the only way to feel important is to make other people feel small. This became a pattern over the years. Whenever the family faced prejudice or cruel comments, Grace would gather the children and help them understand that hatred says more about the person giving it than the person receiving it. The next major challenge came when Thomas was 8. He had always been the most sensitive of the quadruplets, and he started having nightmares again. But these weren't just any nightmares. He was dreaming that Grace would leave them, just like their mother had. What if you get sick like Mummy did? Thomas asked one night, crawling into Grace and Richard's bed at 2 in the morning. What if you go away and never come back? Richard started to reassure him, but Grace put a gentle hand on his arm. Thomas, come here, sweetheart. She pulled him close. Do you remember what I promised you the day I arrived? You said you wouldn't leave just because we didn't want you to. That's right. And do you remember what I promised you when I married Daddy? You said you'd be our mummy forever and ever. And I meant it. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. Your first mummy didn't choose to leave you. She got very sick. And sometimes when people get that sick, their bodies stop working even though they don't want to go. Thomas was quiet for a moment. But what if your body stops working too? Grace thought carefully about her answer. Thomas, I can't promise you that I'll never get sick or that I'll live forever. Nobody can make that promise. But I can promise you that I will never, ever choose to leave you. And if something did happen to me, I would make sure you knew how much I love you every single day until then. How would I know? Because I tell you every day. Because I hug you every day. Because I take care of you when you're sick and celebrate with you when you're happy. Love isn't just words, Thomas, it's actions. And my actions every day show you how much I love you. This conversation led to a family tradition. Every night before bed, Grace would tuck each child in individually and tell them 3 specific things she loved about them from that day. Not general things like you're smart or you're pretty, but specific observations. Emma, today I loved how you helped your brother with his math homework without making him feel stupid. I loved how you shared your dessert with Lucy when she dropped hers. And I loved how you made me laugh when you did that silly dance in the kitchen. The children began to look forward to these moments. More importantly, they began to believe that they were truly seen, truly known, and truly loved. When the children turned 10, Richard decided they were old enough to know the whole truth about their mother's death. Sarah had been driving to pick up a surprise birthday cake for the quadruplets when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. I don't want you to carry any guilt about this, Richard told them as they sat together in the living room. Your mother loved you so much that she was willing to go out in a storm to make your birthday special. The accident was not her fault, and it was not your fault. Emma, always the leader, asked the hardest question. Daddy, were you angry at us because she was getting our cake? Richard felt his throat close up. Oh, sweetheart, I was angry at the world. I was angry at God. I was angry at the drunk driver. But I was never ever angry at you. You four were the only good thing left in my world after she died. Then why did you stop hugging us? James asked quietly. The question hit Richard like a physical blow. What do you mean? After Mummy died, you stopped hugging us, Lucy said. You stopped reading to us at night. You stopped playing with us. Richard looked at Grace, who nodded encouragingly. I was so sad that I forgot how to show love, Richard admitted. I thought if I kept you fed and clothed and safe, that was enough, but I forgot that you needed hugs and stories and games too. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thomas, now 10 but still the baby of the family, climbed into his father's lap. It's okay, Daddy. Grace taught you how to hug us again. Yes, she did, Richard said, holding his son close. Grace taught all of us how to be a family again. As the children entered their teenage years, new challenges arose. Emma, now 13, had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence. Boys at school were starting to notice her, and she was starting to notice them back, but she was also fiercely protective of her family's reputation. When a boy named Marcus asked her to the school dance, Emma said yes. But when Marcus's friends started making crude jokes about Grace being a gold-digging nanny, Emma ended the relationship immediately. You didn't have to do that, Grace told her when Emma explained what happened. Yes, I did, Emma said firmly. If he can't respect my family, he doesn't deserve to be part of it. Grace felt proud and heartbroken at the same time. She was proud of Emma's loyalty, but she didn't want her stepdaughter to sacrifice her own happiness to defend her. Emma, sweetheart, I want to tell you something important. You don't have to fight my battles for me. Part of growing up is learning to choose friends and boyfriends who share your values. If Marcus couldn't see how wonderful our family is, then he wasn't right for you anyway. But don't close your heart to love because you're afraid of what people might say about me. But what if I fall in love with someone who doesn't like you? Then you'll have to decide what matters more to you. But I have faith that anyone good enough for you will be smart enough to see how amazing our family is. James faced different challenges. As a teenager, he struggled with his identity. He was the jokester, the class clown, but inside he often felt empty. The humor that had once been his defense mechanism now felt like a prison. I don't know who I am when I'm not making people laugh, he confessed to Grace one evening. What if there's nothing else to me? Grace sat with him on his bed, looking at the posters and trophies that covered his walls. James, do you remember when you were 7 and Thomas broke his arm falling out of the tree? Yeah, I stayed with him in the hospital all night. And do you remember when Emma was sick with pneumonia last year? I brought her soup and read to her every day. And when Lucy was being bullied at school, I walked her to every class until the bullying stopped. James paused. Oh, you see, the humor is just one part of who you are. You're also loyal, protective, caring, and brave. The jokes are lovely, but they're not what make you special. Lucy's teenage struggles were different still. She had always been the perfectionist, the people pleaser. But as she got older, the pressure she put on herself became overwhelming. She had to have perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect everything. When she was 15, Lucy had a panic attack during a school exam. Grace got the call from the school nurse and found Lucy hyperventilating in the nurse's office. I can't breathe, Lucy gasped. I can't think. I can't remember anything. Grace knelt beside her daughter and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Lucy, look at me. Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're safe. I'm here. When Lucy had calmed down, Grace drove her home instead of back to class. I failed, Lucy whispered in the car. I failed the exam. I failed everything. Lucy, you didn't fail anything. You had a panic attack. It happens to lots of people. But I have to be perfect. If I'm not perfect, people will think I don't deserve this family. Grace pulled the car over and turned to face her daughter. Lucy, where did you get the idea that you have to be perfect to be loved? From everywhere, from school, from the newspapers, from people at the country club. They're all watching us, waiting for us to mess up so they can say we don't belong. And what if they do say that? Then Then they'd be right. Grace felt her heart break. Oh, sweetheart, you belong in this family because we love you, not because you're perfect. You could fail every test, make terrible mistakes, disappoint everyone, and you would still be our daughter. Love isn't something you earn, it's something you're given. Thomas faced perhaps the biggest challenge of all. As the youngest, he had always been babied by everyone in the family. But when he turned 16, he decided he wanted to know more about his birth mother. I love Grace, he told Richard. She's my mom in every way that matters. But I want to know about Sarah too. I want to know what she was like, what she loved, what she dreamed about. Richard had been dreading this conversation for years. Not because he didn't want to talk about Sarah, but because he was afraid it would hurt Grace. But when he discussed it with Grace, she surprised him. Of course he should know about Sarah, she said. She's part of him. She's part of all of them. I would never want to erase her memory. So Richard began telling Thomas stories about Sarah, about how she loved to paint but was terrible at it, about how she sang off key but with such joy that it didn't matter, about how she cried during every movie, even the comedies, about how she had wanted to be a teacher but gave up her career to raise the quadruplets. She sounds wonderful, Thomas said after hearing dozens of stories. She was. And Thomas, she would have loved Grace. She would have been so grateful that Grace loves you all the way she did. How do you know? Because all she ever wanted was for you four to be happy and loved. Grace has given you both. The years flew by. The quadruplets graduated from high school, went to university, and began building their own lives. But they remained close to each other and to Grace and Richard. When Emma graduated medical school, Grace was in the front row, crying with pride. When James got his first teaching job, Grace helped him set up his classroom. When Lucy passed her social work exams, Grace threw her a celebration party. When Thomas finished his psychology degree, Grace framed his diploma and hung it on the kitchen wall next to the children's finger paintings from when they were small. The real test of the family's bond came when Richard suffered a heart attack at age 55. He survived, but the experience shook everyone. The children, now adults, rallied around Grace as she navigated the scary world of hospitals and recovery. What can we do? Emma asked, taking charge as always. Just be here, Grace said. That's all we can do. For 3 weeks, the children took turns staying at the hospital with Grace. They brought her food, made her laugh, and held her when she cried. It was the first time the children had been the ones taking care of Grace, and they rose to the occasion beautifully. You raised them well, Richard said weakly from his hospital bed, watching his children fuss over Grace. We raised them well, Grace corrected, all of us together. Richard recovered fully, but the experience changed the family's perspective on what mattered. They began having family dinners twice a week instead of just Sundays. They took more vacations together. They said, I love you, more often. When Emma announced her engagement to a fellow doctor named David, Grace was thrilled. David was kind, intelligent, and clearly adored Emma. More importantly, he treated Grace with the respect and affection of a son. I'm so glad Emma found someone who appreciates our whole family, Grace told Richard as they watched David play with Thomas's young children at the engagement party. Including you, Richard said, squeezing her hand. Especially me, Grace agreed with a smile. The wedding was beautiful. Emma asked Grace to walk her down the aisle alongside Richard. You're both my parents, she said simply. I want you both to give me away. As they walked Emma down the aisle, Grace thought about the terrified little girl who had once threatened to make her leave. Now Emma was a confident, loving woman who was starting her own family. The transformation had been gradual, built on thousands of small moments of love and patience. James married his college girlfriend, a teacher named Amy, who shared his sense of humor and his big heart. Lucy married her social work colleague Robert in a small ceremony surrounded by the families they had helped over the years. Thomas married his psychology practice partner Helen after a courtship that lasted 5 years because Thomas wanted to be absolutely sure he was ready for marriage. One by one, the children gave Grace grandchildren. First Emma had twins, then James had a son, then Lucy had a daughter, then Thomas had 2 boys. Grace threw herself into grandmotherhood with the same love and dedication she had given to motherhood. "You're spoiling them," Richard said as he watched Grace teach 5-year-old Sarah, named after her grandmother, how to bake cookies. "That's what grandmothers are for," Grace replied, letting little Sarah lick the spoon. "Grandma Grace," Sarah said, looking up with chocolate chip cookie dough on her nose. "Mommy says you weren't always my grandma. She says you used to be her nanny." Grace smiled. "That's right, sweetheart. I took care of your mommy when she was little, just like I'm taking care of you now." "Were you a good nanny?" "I tried to be. What do you think?" Sarah considered this seriously. "I think you were the best nanny in the whole world, because you made my mommy happy, and now she makes me happy." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." On Grace's 60th birthday, the family threw her a surprise party. The children had flown in from around the world, bringing spouses and grandchildren. But the biggest surprise was when Emma stood up to make a speech. 30 years ago, a woman named Grace Johnson knocked on our door and changed our lives forever. We were 4 broken children who thought the world was against us. We were angry, scared, and lost. Grace could have given up on us like everyone else did. Instead, she saw past our behavior to our hearts. Emma paused, looking around the room at her siblings, their families, and the woman who had made it all possible. Grace didn't just raise us, she healed us. She taught us how to love and be loved. She showed us that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love someone, even when it's hard. James stood up next. "Grace taught me that being funny was a gift, but being kind was a choice, and that the choice to be kind was always more important." Lucy was crying as she stood. "Grace taught me that I didn't have to be perfect to be loved. She loved me when I was messy, when I was scared, when I was failing. She taught me that love is not something you earn, it's something you're given freely." Finally, Thomas stood, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace taught me that it's okay to grieve for what you've lost while still being grateful for what you have. She never tried to replace our mother. She just loved us enough to help us heal from losing her." Grace was sobbing now, overwhelmed by the love in the room. Richard stood and put his arm around her. "When I hired Grace 30 years ago, I thought I was just getting help with childcare. I had no idea I was inviting a miracle into our lives. Grace didn't just save my children, she saved me too." The party continued late into the night, with grandchildren running around while the adults shared memories and laughter. As Grace watched her family, she thought about the journey that had brought them all together. She had started as a nanny to 4 impossible children. But somewhere along the way, she had become something much more important. She had become the heart of a family. Years later, when people asked Grace what her secret was, she would smile and give the same answer every time. "There's no secret. Children just need to know they're loved exactly as they are, not as we wish they were. And they need to know that love isn't going anywhere no matter what they do." It was a simple truth, but it had the power to change everything. And in the end, that's exactly what it did. Grace Johnson, the woman who had been written off by society for marrying above her station, had built something more valuable than all of Richard's money. She had built a family founded on love, respect, and unshakable bonds. When Grace passed away peacefully at the age of 85, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. Former students of James, families that Lucy had helped, patients that Emma had healed, and clients that Thomas had counseled. But the most moving moment came when Emma, now a grandmother herself, stood at the podium to deliver the eulogy. "Grace Johnson came into our lives when we needed her most. She stayed when everyone else gave up. She loved us when we were unlovable. She believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. And she taught us the most important lesson of all, that every child deserves to be loved and every family deserves a chance to heal. Emma paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Grace used to say that she was just a nanny who got lucky, but we know the truth. We were four broken children who got blessed, and because of that blessing, we were able to go out into the world and bless others. As the family gathered after the funeral, Thomas found his father sitting alone in Grace's garden on the swing where she used to sit every evening. She would have loved seeing everyone here today, Thomas said, sitting down beside Richard. She did love everyone here, Richard replied. That was her gift. She could see the best in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. What are we going to do without her? Richard smiled through his tears. We're going to keep loving each other the way she taught us to. We're going to raise our children and grandchildren with the same patience and kindness she showed us. We're going to carry her forward in everything we do. And that's exactly what they did. Emma continued healing children, always remembering Grace's lesson that understanding must come before judgment. James kept making people laugh while teaching them, knowing that joy was one of life's greatest gifts. Lucy fought for families who were struggling, remembering what it felt like to need someone to believe in you. Thomas helped other families heal from loss, using the wisdom Grace had given him about love and grief. The Blackwell family grew and flourished, spreading Grace's influence to new generations. Her great-grandchildren would grow up hearing stories about the remarkable woman who had saved their family and changed their destiny. And sometimes, when the family gathered for Sunday dinner at the old house, they could almost feel Grace there with them, smiling as she watched the legacy of love she had built continue to grow and touch new lives. The girl who had been written off as just a nanny had become the foundation of a dynasty built not on money or power, but on something far more valuable, unconditional love. In the end, Grace Johnson had proven that the most important job in the world isn't about fancy titles or big salaries. It's about showing up, staying committed, and loving people exactly as they are while helping them become who they're meant to be. And that, perhaps, is the greatest success story of all. Dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Please support me by subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to like and share this video. It means the world to me. Take care of yourself and never forget how much you're loved. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Sending you all my love.